For decades, Bonn, a small tranquil city on the Rhine River, was the capital of West Germany. Then the Berlin Wall fell, and that city, Berlin, was to become the capital of the reunited country, despite its past. 2 world wars were waged from here. It was the seat of the Nazi regime, and then the East German dictatorship.
Other countries in Europe had been nervous. Everyone was watching. What is Germany doing?
In less than 10 years, Berlin, once divided into East and West, became the German capital. How did it happen? And why does the chancellor now reside in a washing machine? After the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, Germany was reunified the following year. The question quickly arose of where the seat of government should now be. Bonn, the seat of the West German federal government since 1949? Or Berlin, the historic capital of Prussia and the Weimar Republic, but also the center of power of the criminal Nazi regime and the GDR. US-born historian Hope Harrison was in Berlin during those turbulent last months of East Germany and remembers the big debate.
The history of Bonn was Western ally, a member of NATO, very sort of calm and democratic. And so many people said, oh, you're going back to Berlin where so much terrible autocratic power from the Kaisers and then Hitler and then the communists was exercised from Berlin. So many people said, Berlin is associated with a very violent past.
By making Bonn its capital, West Germany had deliberately sought to distance itself from those regimes. But during the more than 40 years that Germany was divided, it was always clear that a reunified country would have Berlin as its seat of government. For East German politicians like Wolfgang Thierse, it was a question of credibility.
There were the expectations of many East Germans as to whether reunification would actually lead not only to the continuation of the West German Republic, the Federal Republic, but also to a shift in the focus of politics to the east, to Berlin, and whether the consequences of this wonderful event of German reunification would be realized.
Wolfgang Thierse took part in the 12-hour, highly emotional parliamentary debate in June 1991 over the future seat of government.
Die Grundsatzentscheidung für Berlin muss jetzt erfolgen. Sie wäre ein Zeichen, ein wunderbarer Anlass der Hoffnung auf wirkliche Gemeinsamkeit und Solidarität.
The voices for and against were regardless of party affiliation.
There was also the fear of a big city, as opposed to idyllic little Bonn on the beautiful Rhine. That was also an issue, whether to take politics to the place where all the problems, the contradictions, all the difficulties of German reunification are much more clearly, intensely, and painfully visible than in quaint little Bonn.
It was a close call, but the decision finally fell.
Die Spannung ist riesengroß und ich gebe das Ergebnis jetzt bekannt.
The capital city decision fell in favor of Berlin with 338 votes to 320. It presented the city with a historically unique challenge. By 1999, in just 8 years, a functioning seat of government was to be established in this once divided city. An enormous task. The wall had left deep wounds that needed to be healed. Remnants of the war were still everywhere. But how much of the traces of 2 unjust regimes should be erased, and how much history should remain visible? Compromises had to be made.
I remember that the Chancellor moved into the former State Council building. It's a bit funny that Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor at the time, moved into the official residence that had previously been used by Ulbricht and Honecker, the 2 high-ranking East German officials. But that's part of it. It's part of German history.
Ein Kapitel deutscher Geschichte.
Improvising and taking advantage of interim spaces, that was Berlin's strength in these years, a breeding ground for a unique subculture. West Berlin, with its isolated location and vibrant nightlife, had already become an alternative hotspot in the 1980s. Now the scene spread to the whole city.
Clubs emerged in the unfinished, partially dilapidated houses. So suddenly there was this lively cultural life, a scene, or whatever you want to call it.
It was a fascinating period to live through, the 90s in Berlin, with people squatting in buildings and all sort of techno music clubs and, sprung up all over the city. It was this very exciting time, this sense of, we're on the cusp of something new.
This state of being unfinished was ideal for the party and cultural scene. But the new government needed the opposite: order, structure, stability, and began to build in an unprecedented show of strength.
This was going to be a massive undertaking costing billions of Deutschmarks.
20 billion Deutschmarks, equivalent to around $12 billion at the time, were made available to relocate the government from Bonn and build in Berlin. This capital city would not remain a temporary solution. It was intended to be permanent. The so-called Spröer had been part of the border complex. After the wall was torn down, a huge wasteland remained, and that was exactly where the heart of the new capital was to be built. Smack dab in the center was a historic building steeped in different layers of history.
What to do with the Reichstag? The building that had housed the former parliament of Germany under the Kaisers and under Hitler until the Reichstag fire of February 1933, which the Nazis blamed on the communists and used an excuse to really step up their autocratic control. At the end of World War II, the Soviet Red Army got there and hoisted the Soviet flag over the ruins of the Reichstag, a very famous picture.
By the way, a propaganda photo created by the Soviet Union to celebrate its victory. The Reichstag was now to be gutted and modernized inside by British architect Sir Norman Foster and given a new lease of life under a glass dome. The old dome was destroyed in the fire of 1933. The new dome, made of glass and accessible to visitors, stands for a new transparent democracy. No one should be afraid of this new Germany.
When you're up there, you can look down into the plenary chambers of the parliament. So, you as a visitor, as just a regular person, have a transparent view of what's going on in the Bundestag.
And the politicians in the plenary chamber also have constant reminders of whom they are working for.
When you sit downstairs in Parliament, you can look up and see, at least as shadows, the people walking around up there. And then it's nice to be able to say, the citizens of the country and visitors to the country have their eye on the lawmakers, so to speak.
But before that renovation, an art event delighted Berlin visitors in 1995 and gave the grumpy German stereotype a friendly face. After decades of requests, the packaging artists Christo and Jean-Claude were allowed to turn the Reichstag into an art object, wrapping it in 100,000 square meters of shiny silver fabric.
I think that everyone who remembers it is still enchanted by the memory. Those were wonderful summer weeks, glorious weather, balmy evenings, and the Reichstag shrouded in a silver cloak.
5 million people came to look at this. There was a sense that by wrapping it, all of this history was somehow exorcised. Get rid of the bad and prepare it for a new life of democratic, united Germany.
This rejuvenated centerpiece was to be incorporated into the so-called Band des Bundes, or Belt of the Federation, half of which is in the former eastern part of Berlin and half in the former western part.
That was the plan. The government and parliamentary buildings should not only be located in the west, but should transcend the former border along this federal axis. That also means crossing the Spree River because the Spree was partly the inner city border and thus the inner German border.
So what's the washing machine? Berliners love giving funny nicknames to public structures, and they decided that the Federal Chancellery, one of the largest government buildings in the world complete with a helipad, looks like, well, a washing machine.
This all took time. Berlin was a massive construction zone.
And the clock was ticking. Wolfgang Thierse, then president of the German parliament, bore responsibility for the move.
It was always exciting and associated with adventure. Would it go ahead on time? We didn't want to postpone the move any further because it was a political statement that this republic was capable of achieving something important.
The new building for the Foreign Office was completed at the last minute in 1999. Then it was time for the big relocation. In a final push, the government moved from the Rhine to the Spree within a few weeks, transporting thousands upon thousands of moving boxes and tons of file folders. After all, this all happened before digitization.
The move in 1999 during the summer recess was, of course, a logistical masterpiece. Looking back, it seems to have been surprisingly successful.
Finally, in the autumn of 1999, the German government began its work in the new capital.
Buildings have been built, the government is here, the cultural life is very strong. But I would never feel comfortable saying, Berlin is done developing.
The city remained a construction site in the decades that followed. A modern main railway station opened in 2006. The new Berlin-Brandenburg Airport was completed in 2020, with a 9-year delay, not quite as masterfully on schedule. Housing is needed for more and more citizens in a city whose population is approaching the 4 million mark. And the washing machine is to be expanded by 2028 with a new building containing 400 offices. But the debate continues. How much history should be preserved? How much of a new beginning is necessary?
I always believe that in a city like Berlin, which, according to a famous saying, destroys itself every few decades, it is important to have memories of history. After all, which cities do we like, and do we like to visit? Rome, Paris, Prague, to name just 3. In other words, cities where different historical traces are visible, present, and perceptible. That's what makes cities exciting.
The Berlin Wall remains the most prominent symbol of the formerly divided city. Another rather controversial example of the struggle for visible history is probably the historic city palace. Built in the 15th century, it was the seat of Prussian emperors and kings until 1918. It was partially damaged during World War II, demolished by the GDR, and replaced by the Palace of the Republic, a prestige project of the East German regime. After reunification, the Palace of the Republic was itself demolished, and the reconstructed City Palace was rebuilt by 2020 as a museum and cultural center.
It's part of Berlin to be a city that's never finished.
A capital city that emerged from contradictions.
Ich bin ein Berliner.
It will surely create many more versions of itself. What do you think? Does Berlin fulfill its role as capital city?